If you're preparing to take the IELTS Academic Writing Test, you'll want to know what's included in the test, what you need to do, and how to do it. That's what this video is all about. We're going to cover Task 1 of the IELTS Academic Writing Exam. My name is Erin Labax. I'm with High Value Writing, where we help people all around the world write and communicate in the strongest way they can. Thanks for being here to watch this video. Here's what we'll be talking about. This video is part of a series, and this particular video will cover what to do in Task 1. We'll study the prompt, we'll study some examples, we'll talk about how to plan out and outline your answer. Other videos coming up, we'll look a little more at Task 2 and some of the specific ways you're graded. But this video as well will focus on the first two areas that you're graded on. That first one of task response means, did you do all the requirements? That's why we'll be breaking down the assignment and what your response should include. Cohesion, coherence, does your response stick together? Does it all work together? Does it flow? We'll start talking about that in this video, and then I'll be back with another video on flow and cohesion very soon as well. Okay, let's get started with what to do on Task 1. We're going to look at a couple example prompts, and as you probably already know, you get about 20 minutes to do this part of the writing. The IELTS writing test has two tasks. The first one is shorter than the second one. You get an hour altogether. Most people recommend spending about 20 minutes on Task 1, which we're looking at here, and about 40 minutes on Task 2, which we'll look at later. You probably want to go for about 150 words here, and let's take a look at what your prompt will be like. What assignment will you get? Pretty much each time somebody takes an IELTS Task 1 writing test, they're given something visual to study. So you'll get a sentence that says, this chart shows, or this diagram covers, or this graph presents, right? And then what it's about. And then they'll tell you what to do with it. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting on the main features, the most important aspects of these charts and graphs, and include comparisons, more, less, bigger, smaller, increased, decreased, that kind of information. So let's get into that. We'll start with a couple of prompts and how would we choose what features we're even going to discuss. I have examples here from IELTS.org. We'll look at one example about education, and we'll look at one example about TV and radio use. Well, when you're deciding which features to talk about, you have two places to look. You can look at the prompt itself, see what sounded important in the prompt, and make sure you talk about those features. Secondly, you can look at the graph and see what you notice that stands out. So let's talk about both of those ways, because the first thing you need to do is decide what features will I be talking about in my response. Okay. Two examples, and I bolded some words there that I think are the main features where you can actually study the assignment they gave you and figure out what to talk about there. The chart below shows the number of men and women in further education in Britain in 3 periods and whether they were studying full-time or part-time. So in the blue, we have the general theme, are people pursuing further education in Britain? We know we're going to talk about that throughout the whole response. But for choosing your features, those other 3 stood out to me. It's men and women, it's different periods of time, and it's about whether they go full-time or part-time. So I would already know, just from looking at the prompt, I want to include those 3 ideas in my response. And in a moment, we'll look at the chart itself and see what else we would gain from that chart. But first, here's an example from another topic on media. The graph below shows radio and television audiences throughout the day in 1992. So again, we've got this theme of audiences in 92, But I think the features that stand out from that prompt example are the radio and TV and the different times of day. Those are the ones that are going to fluctuate or change and allow you to make comparisons. Okay, let's look at the graphs that went with each of these prompts and see what other features might stand out by studying those graphs. First one, we're looking for what stands out in this graph about education. Well, a few things stand out to me, and these might become the features in my response. We have male and female groups. We have a rise in the part-time education on the side of the females, although on the men, it's gone down and back up. And we have a very big difference between the high numbers of people taking part-time education and the lower number of people who are able to take full-time education. So those three areas I circled, those are significant. You can see how they also allow you to think about comparing, right? Men and women, full-time and part-time, then and now, right? Those are all setting us up for things that we can say are the same or different or more or less later. All right, let's do the same thing for the second topic. Here was the chart. It's a little bit busier for radio and television audiences. But what I noticed as things that stand out that might become my features are the morning, big difference between radio and TV, the middle of the day when they switch, which one is stronger than the other, the evening when we see TV go way above radio, and then the early hours of the morning where they're actually very similar. We can see in the picture even how much we're going to be able to do comparisons by looking at those. So by putting together what you learned from the prompt, what you learned from studying the graph, now you know what are the important features that you want to talk about in your response. Okay, so now you've chosen which features you're going to talk about. This is a huge part of getting a high grade for completing the task, because if you don't cover the main features and leave something important out, you can get minus points for that. So that's why we not only studied what words come out in the prompt that they clearly feel are important, and also what did we observe in the visual. You want to do your best to have studied the whole thing, right, to choose those features. Now we're going to talk about how would you report on those features? How would you summarize what you've learned in the chart? Okay, so first thing I would suggest is now that you have your features in mind, okay, men and women, these years, radio and TV, right? Then look at the data for trends. What seem to be some overall trends? Once you've figured those out, put them in a sentence. That might be your thesis statement or your main point. And then plan 1 point for each trend you're talking about. Let's walk that through with each of our 2 topics. Right here, talking about looking for trends. When I studied that graph on men and women's education, these were some trends that I saw. Men and women were talked about many times. So a trend about gender, men's have varied education, women's rates have gone up consistently, and women passed men at one point in part-time ed, right? So that's a few trends about the men and women feature. Then we had that idea of the 3 time periods and which decades people went to school during. We can see more men than women in 1970s and 80s, but more women in 1990s, right? So that gives us a lot to report on and compare. And full or part-time does too, because many more people did part-time education than full-time education. So in all of these trends, we will get to use comparisons and we will get to fill our paragraphs with the numbers and facts from the graph that show these trends. Okay, let's look at the idea of trends for the radio and TV example. Radio, it's popular in the morning. It peaks at 8. It goes down after that. TV, it's very popular in the evenings. And it's used more overall than radio. Another comparison. Times of day, we knew that was a big feature because it was in the prompt. We have the 1 p.m. or 1300 switch from using more radio to TV. And we have the fact that in the early morning, they're actually pretty similar in that chart. So I'm thinking about these three trends. And now I'm starting to think, how will I put them into a sentence to show, here's my main point. Here's my main answer about what I see happening in this visual. So I'm saying the trends in a sentence. This is kind of similar to writing a thesis statement. So here's a review on that. But what I've done is taken the men and women, the part-time and full-time, and the decades, and put it all into 1 to 2 sentences saying my main point. This chart shows that both British men and women pursued full-time higher education at increasing rates over 3 decades. However, it also shows that women surpassed men in rates of part-time attendance. So I've taken all of my features, put them into trends, put that into a sentence. Now I have my main point. I already know I am getting a good grade on task completion because I studied the chart and put all the features in my main point. This is also helping me get higher scores in cohesion because my main point is holding everything together, so the whole essay will be related, right? Let's try it again for the other one. According to this graph, people in the UK watched TV more than listened to the radio in 1992, but it depended on the time of day. That captures all those trends, time of day, year, radio, TV, right? And then I'm going to go on to add a little more to my point. In fact, radio use exceeded TV viewing in the morning, kind of a feature. However, TV use was higher overall, including a primetime peak that far exceeded radio use. So I've covered almost all the main points of that chart in this one sentence. Right? So you're thinking about this as your main point or your thesis, and then you know what we do from there, right? Break that down into how you're going to order your paragraphs. So I would suggest 1 point, in some cases 1 paragraph for each major feature or trend. Sometimes a few points that are related will go together in a paragraph, like I'm showing here with the A and B. I would put those in the 1, 2, and 3 kind of parent paragraphs. But here's how I might organize that based on what I said as my main point sentence. Men and women's full-time attendance has gone up consistently over 3 decades. Next paragraph is about part-time. I already covered full-time. Let me get into part-time. Men and women have had different rates. Here's what we've seen from men. Here's what we've seen from women. This is where you're putting in all your details about the numbers that you found in those charts. We'll talk about that more in a later video, but what we're seeing here is almost like your outline, and then you're filling in the proof, the evidence from what you saw in the chart. Lastly, I would maybe do a whole paragraph or at least a strong point. Women surpassed men in part-time attendance in 1990. That goes back to our main point sentence as well. So each of these 1, 2, and 3 can become a paragraph. Don't forget when you have a new paragraph to start it with a very strong topic sentence. Here's a review on how to do that. Okay, one more. Let's look at how we might outline the example about radio and TV. We could say, overall, there's been more TV, than radio, but there's more radio briefly in the morning. And then TV passes it up in the midday. Then TV gets much higher later in the evening, but they're similar in the early hours. Because this is based on chronology, you could even use that concept to order your ideas. You could go from morning until night following these trends, or you could divide this paper into radio, TV, right? But we're always looking at these differences and similarities, which brings us to the idea of making comparisons, which is also part of the requirement. So how do we make comparisons? It did say specifically in the requirement to not only report and summarize, but to make comparisons where appropriate. And that can also include how things are different or how they're the same. It can show change, more or less, increase, decrease. I want to share with you some typical words we might use to make comparisons, and then show some examples, because what we already looked at as a sort of outline, you can see in those trends, there are already comparisons there. Your job is to make sure that you bring those out in the essay and use comparison language to make it really clear that you saw those similarities or differences. So first thing I would say is look for similarities or differences in the main features you've selected. We've already kind of done that, right? More men than women here, more women than men here, more in the morning of radio, more in the evening of TV. This is all really good information for making comparisons. So once you find those features, or we're going to check the notes we already made and find the features in those notes, then you can go on to use strong compare and contrast language. Often that'll mean more or less of something, or more or fewer than. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether to use the word less or fewer, so here's a quick review on that. But those are good comparison words, right? Then we also have however, on the other hand, instead, in spite of this, nevertheless, kind of means things are different, but we're still connecting them. And a couple of sentence structures you could use. While X is true, Y is also true in this case, right? So while radio and TV usage were at most times of day, they actually were similar at 3 in the morning. That kind of approach. Or although X, also Y. Although we saw fewer men pursuing this level of education at this time, we saw more women doing it. So those sentence structures can help you with comparisons, but guess what? We already have comparisons ready for us if we go back and look at those notes we already made about the trends. These words show that what we found in the trends are comparison-based. Some of the rates were up, some of the rates were different, some of the rates passed one another. Those are all comparing and showing some similar or different, right? Same with the radio one. We have more, surpass, higher, similar. Compare and contrast language. That's what we really want to lean into on this essay. And so finally, let's talk just briefly about how you could take one of these mini trend outlines we've made and turn that into your essay. We'll do some practice topic sentences, and then my next video will help you with task 2 and more about the writing itself and the sentence structure and the vocab. Okay, so going from your outline to your essay, it's all about those topic sentences. Remember how with the men and women in education example, I had 3 main points, 1, 2, 3. Well, I can just do a topic sentence for each and then go from there to add in the facts that prove that topic sentence. Now I'm done with that paragraph. Here's how I would write them. Topic sentence 1, both men and women have pursued more full-time education from the 1970s up through the 1990s, right? I'm making a statement. Now you know what's coming in that paragraph. Data and facts about the 70s, 80s, and 90s for men and women in full-time education, including the numbers you found on that chart. Next paragraph, in terms of part-time education, men's rates have fluctuated while women's rates have consistently risen. Now you know what I'm covering in that paragraph, examples of men's rates going up and down slightly, numbers of women's rates consistently going up. And then my final paragraph here will be about that change we saw in 1990. That really stood out. Around 1990, women surpassed men in terms of enrolling in part-time education. All right, so once I have that, I'm plugging in the rest of the facts that I already studied in that chart. So as you study your features and get ready to summarize, keep in mind many of those features are comparisons that you can make sure to point out to score high in that area as well. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I'll be back soon with a video covering what to do in task 2. Then we'll get into how to be cohesive, how to have sentence variety, and what to do about vocabulary and grammar. Thank you for watching. Best wishes for your studying. If you have a question, drop it in the comments. I'll get back to you right away.